All right, I was given the high sign that it's 6 o'clock and we're ready to get started. I'd like to call us to order in accordance with South Carolina Code of Laws, 1985, Section 30-4-80-E. The following have been notified of the time, place, and agenda of this meeting: the Herald, Charlotte Observer, CN2, and WRHI. You will all notice that Dr. Epps is not with us tonight. His sister passed away unexpectedly yesterday, so I'd ask that you keep him in your thoughts and prayers. And along those lines, we will please join me in a moment of silence. Thank you. We'll now stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You've all been given a copy of the agenda. We will make one adjustment in that the superintendent and opening where it has Dr. Epps, that will be covered by Mr. Young. Are there any other adjustments or changes?
No, ma'am.
That will stand as amended. And we do have a couple of cards for public participation. So I'll call your name. If you'll come up to the podium, you'll each have 5 minutes. I have 2 cards. The first one is Charlotte Carriage. Come on up. You can come to the microphone, state your name and address, and then the podium is yours to give us your comments.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Charlotte Carriage. I am a resident of Fort Mill. I am at 1774 Farintosh. And this is my first time participating in this meeting, in this forum, and was told that there was going to be some discussion relative to athletics on the agenda. I have a daughter. I actually have 2 kids who have gone through the school system. My son just graduated but participated in sports. My daughter has been participating in sports as well and is a 10th grader at Nation Fort High School. And one of the things that I wanted to understand better, specifically since athletics was being discussed tonight, is just kind of the adjustments or the allocations within resources for the 3 high schools in particular. What I have found is that there has been extreme discrepancies as you go from one high school to another. There's obviously a huge emphasis on football, but all the other sports, for girls in particular, tend to be less supported and less funded. So I just was curious about what the position was and the plan was to not only make Fort Mill school districts great for academics, but also for athletics as well.
Thank you. To your point, since you haven't joined our meetings in the past, we're not going to talk about it right now, but you will potentially get some of those questions answered. I think some of those guys that, when they do their presentation later, can keep that in mind.
Thank you.
Thank you. And then I have a second card from Almedina Dugalich. Okay. Come on up. Same drill.
Hello, my name is Almedina Dugalich, and first and foremost, I hate public speaking, so this is a big deal for me. First school board meeting I'm attending, but I felt that I needed to bring this up to the attention, which I'm sure everybody is well aware of that too. But I have 2 kids in school now, a 2nd grader and a kindergartner, and came to United States as a refugee from Bosnia. My parents brought me here to keep us safe, to keep the next generation safe, and unfortunately, that's not how I'm starting to feel with all the school shootings that are taking place. And I'm at the point where I feel PTSD personally sending my kids to school, especially with the most recent school shooting in Texas. So I've reached out via email, and I have shared my concerns, but I felt like that we're being given generic answers. We're trying to do something about it, but at the same time, there's not enough resources at the time. And this should be at the top of our list to keep the children safe and make sure that we send them to school, that we don't think about whether our kids are going to come back from school. And we're not facing the same thing that happened to Texas and many other states. So I would like to know what we're doing as a community. I know we can't solve problems at the United States level, but we can try and solve problems here within our community. So that's my purpose while I'm here.
Thank you. Again, it may come up in the conversation later. We're not going to have a school safety conversation right now during this particular part of the agenda. Thank you.
Okay. Quick question though, when are we going to have a conversation?
When we add it to an agenda item, when it is actually an agenda item, so that other people that knew that this topic was going to be on the agenda could be in participation.
Okay, so can we have a conversation about that later as to how I can get it on the list for an agenda item?
Request it. Yes, you can. certainly
Okay,
request it.
perfect, thank you.
Okay, we're going to start now with staff reports. The first one being our school opening enrollment update, and there's a couple different names, so I'm going to let you broker through how that needs to go.
I think Mr. Ollinger and Dr. Wakesness will be here to answer any questions. I'll just kind of start off by saying we're going to show a short video. I think Joe has it. Just this is the life of a kindergartner on his first day, and I think everybody will enjoy this.
I'm ready for kindergarten.
Welcome to kindergarten, where we can learn and play. Get ready for all of the fun we'll have today. I'll try my best and work hard, be kind in every way. We're ready for all of the fun we'll have today. Hey, all the fun we'll have today.
Okay, we're gonna put our lunchbox right here.
Welcome to kindergarten. Welcome
We're gonna find your cubby. Number 7. We're gonna hang it up so that we can unzip. I have no back. I love it. It matches your lunchbox, doesn't it?
how to take turns, holding the pencil correctly to write with you. The future is bright.
Right up here up top. There you go. All right, come on over.
Where we can learn and play. Get ready for all of the fun we'll have today. I'll try my best and work hard.
And the last thing we do is we wash our hands before we play. Sink is right there. You know how to turn it on?
All the fun we'll have today. Hey, a whole lot of fun, a whole lot of games. We'll learn how to write our first and last name. Reading sight words like I am good. And sharing our supplies like every friend should. Colors and numbers.
Well, I want to see what you can build. When you finish building, you let me know, and we'll take a picture of what you make, okay?
We'll read and we'll write with you. The future is bright, so sing with me now. Welcome to kindergarten, where we can learn and play. Get ready for all of the fun we'll have today. I'll try my best and work hard. Be kind in every way. We're ready for all of the fun we'll have today. Sing with me now. Welcome to kindergarten, where we can learn and play every way. We're ready for all of the fun we'll have today. Okay. All the fun we'll have today. All the fun we'll have today.
Thank you, Joe. That's a great video. Just like Blake in the video, you could see all the smiling faces. If you're wondering why there wasn't a full class of kindergartners, we had a staggered start, as you know. So, but you can tell he had a great day. And outside of some of the normal challenges, we did have some other challenges the first week of school. We had obviously the water main break caused 8 schools to have to boil their water, but our food services department picked it right up, and we were able to continue with school. We had a couple of fire alarm issues at a couple of schools, and then on Friday, you probably were part of the worst traffic you've ever seen in Fort Mill, South Carolina, due to a tanker truck flipping over. So outside of that, we still had some of those normal challenges, but we had a great start to the school year. A lot of us, the district administration, Christy, Ms. Spears, we went around to all of the schools the first day of school, and just to see all the smiling faces, the staff was excited to be there. And it felt like the first time in 3 years, really, that we've had a somewhat normal start to the school year. So it was just an awesome opening, and we were really happy to be back. I will say some of the normal challenges we had, transportation had the normal issues the first couple of weeks. We are 24, 25 bus drivers short right now. So if you know anybody that wants to drive a bus, we need activity drivers, we need route drivers. Please tell them to go to our website. We'd love to have them as part of our district. We also had, obviously the normal food lines and those types of things the first few days. We were able to get all those kinks out pretty quickly. So our transportation department, we do have some double routes that we've had to create at several of our schools. We are up almost 1,600 riders from last year to this year, which is pretty impressive. I mean, a lot of people are utilizing the buses, but it does cause somewhat of an issue when we're short drivers. So we do have our numbers. We did pass the 18,000 mark this morning. As of this morning, we're at 18,018 students. I'm sure that's probably gone up. We will see a little bit of a drop after 10 days, as we have some students that have not shown yet. They might be starting school in Charlotte or somewhere else that starts, later in the year. So, but we did pass that 18,000 mark. Our kindergarten numbers are a little low. We're still trying to figure that out. They're lower than normal. But it could be just, we've had that in the past. We've had low sizes in certain grade levels, and it just really depends. There are some transitional kindergarten class or programs that have opened up in the community, so that could have an effect on it as well. So what questions do you have for me or Mike or Peter?
So I have one question, and I already know the answer, and you've kind of already touched on it. We're short 25 bus drivers. I had some families reach out to me recently, like today, about middle school bus routes, in particular for Mason's Bend.
Okay.
I'm sure that it's a matter of double routes, needing double routes, whatever the case happens to be, and once we get bus drivers, that'll shake out.
Yep, it'll shake out, and it gets better as time goes along. It just, takes them a few weeks to get the routes down pat to figure out the fastest way to get, I don't say fastest like unsafe fastest, but figure out those routes and get students back to home and then back to the school to pick up the second load of
And a higher
students.
ridership, and, middle school and Mason's Bend finishing out with their build
Right.
out and
Yep.
whatnot may have produced a little more than what we had.
Yeah, exactly.
Because what'd you say, up 1,600 from the end of school last year?
Right.
And while we're up some number of students, we're not up 1,600 students.
Right.
And down 25 bus
Yeah.
drivers, so.
Right.
Yeah, but we'll get that. I would say, I would just,
the message I
I would just say to the public, if you can be patient with us for, a good 2 to 3 weeks once school starts, hopefully we get those things ironed out. And we are, actively pursuing other bus drivers to step up and hopefully hire some of those. And yep, you do need a CDL, but we have a good training department and we'll train you up real well. So.
Mr. Young, can you compare the numbers? You might not even have a pre-pandemic ridership versus this year. Did it dip during the pandemic, and is it back where it is?
It definitely dipped during the pandemic. I couldn't tell you if it's back up to where it was, but I can get that information for you.
But I would also think, when we grow by over 1,000 students a year, some of those students surely will be riding buses.
Right.
So just over since the last 3 years.
But I definitely think that is a part of it. I think people are more comfortable riding the bus.
I was going to say, certainly by the end of the year last year, we had removed the restrictions, but we had been encouraging people when they could, because we could only do so many seats with social distancing, and I think a lot of parents were less comfortable with the shoulder to shoulder in a bus, and now that seems to be getting back to normal.
Any recommendations from the administration on recruiting and anything additional that's needed to recruit for those 25?
I talked with some people today. I mean, we're going to put it out there on social media. We're doing some bonuses to bring drivers in for our current bus drivers. So, we're trying different things to get bus drivers here. But what we really need right now too are not just route drivers. We need activity drivers. We're short on those, and we're using all of our bus drivers to run routes. So if there are people that just want to run activity buses, like they want to take the football team to their football games or, the band to the band competitions, we need those drivers too. They don't have to be regular route, drivers. They could be people that work full-time jobs.
And it doesn't have to be during
Right,
the day. Because
correct.
most of those are after school.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yep.
we're still getting about 50 to 70 new every day, right? So
Right.
we'll see where we land, but not only are we up above 18, but just between yesterday and today, there were 75 more,
Right.
right? that have registered.
And we'll get a push right after Labor Day as well, because people think that that's when school starts. They're moving here from the north.
Oh, wait, it's mid-August,
Right,
you're already in school?
right.
Yeah.
I have a question for probably Mr. Erlinger and Dr. Wakes about class ratios and numbers. Are there any bubbles or anything that we need to be aware of in different grade levels that could be a concern?
I'll let Dr. Wakeson speak to middle and high. At elementary, we're in great shape. We looked at that right before the school year. I've not heard of another bubble at this time, and you can probably see through your ratios. Our kindergarten, as Mr. Young spoke to, we did come in really low, and I believe that was talked about at previous board meetings. We're about 140, smaller than we were last year, somewhere close to that. So our ratios in kindergarten are going to be are smaller than normal, which I know our teachers appreciate. So there's no bubbles as of yet that I'm aware of.
Yeah, for middle and high school, we are doing pretty well. We've had a little bit of a, I would say struggle, but this is a good thing. We've had an increase in numbers of middle schoolers wanting to do band. And band is already very popular, and we have a lot of kids that are wanting to take it in the 6th grade this year. So we've added a couple halftime positions to accommodate, because you can only have so many students in each class. So we're trying to balance we don't want to turn any kid away from band, and we've had to add a couple part-time people to accommodate those students.
I wonder if Ireland has anything to do with that.
Oh, maybe. You never know. Looking forward to it.
An opportunity, yeah. Well, or Hawaii, or, you know.
Or any others?
Yeah, so.
One comment I wanted to make more than anything is that, the administration recommended to us over the summer that we need to do some things to attract good quality, excellent teachers, especially because there's a nationwide teacher shortage and there's a statewide teacher shortage. And our staff has done a fantastic job, our HR, and has done a fantastic job not only recruiting, but I was thrilled to hear that we started our school year fully staffed. So that tells you that we're not only attracting good quality teachers, but we're retaining the ones that we do have.
Well, and if you read your clippings, that is not the case
Yes.
in a lot of districts, so.
Right. Yep.
I will point out that unlike prior years, that happened like last Tuesday or the day of,
Right.
our last meeting, I guess I should say. So it is happening later, so it's definitely impacting us.
They
We were
worked
just
hard.
fortunate enough to get it done.
Thank you.
Well, thank y'all.
I would just say Dr. Epps was very disappointed that he couldn't give this
Yep.
update. When we had talked a couple days ago about it, he really wanted to convey just the excitement that he felt for the year, that he felt in the schools on Monday of last week, and appreciation for all of our staff, all of our families, especially given the week that had some quirkiness to it. So
And I'm
we're off to a good start.
Yeah, and I'm not big on social media. Like, I don't get on a lot, but if you got on social media the first week, everybody was posting pictures and talking about how great the first few days went. So it was really awesome to see the kids' face, but it was awesome to see our teachers too. I felt like they were just so happy, and they've worked so hard to get ready for this. And I'm just happy that we're back to a somewhat new normal, I guess you could say. So,
Thank you.
thank you.
Our next update is athletic supplements, and we've got Mr. Lewis and Mr. Wilson on the agenda. I'll let you guys tag team, and you heard some of the questions earlier, or some of the thoughts earlier, so anything you can incorporate along those lines would be helpful.
Good evening. I wanted to specifically speak, just so you had a chance to kind of hear from the perspective of a principal, right, of what my vision, or our vision is. We want athletics to be excellent across the board. Just like we, as a district, we talk about children first every day, right? And we have a standard of excellence, and we're trying to draw in great teachers. Those coaches have an impact that can't really be put into words a lot of times, through those relationships that they're able to develop with those players. They are essentially teachers after hours. So they teach in the day, and then they teach after hours. So my point of view is we're trying to recruit some of those. I know there was some questions brought up about some potential concern about us giving emphasis or raises to specific areas. We met as an administrative team and discussed this a little bit. I would equate this to kind of like paving a road, to put it in perspective. When you pave a road, you don't just take new asphalt and lay it down over what's there, right? If you do, you still have potholes. Well, what we're trying to fix right now are potholes, right, to get everyone on the same playing field. I also wanted to speak just a little bit in regards to the athletic directors. I did not want them speaking on their own behalf because their raise, if you will, was on that agenda as well, right? When I became a principal, the biggest difference in being a principal and an assistant principal was I can't turn this job off now, right? So when I was an assistant principal, I could leave work every day at 4:30, 5 o'clock, and I really didn't have to think about it again until I walked back in the next day. That's what he lives every day with athletics. So he's living that same lifestyle that I'm living. Phones ring at 7 o'clock in the morning. You know, matter of fact, one rang this morning, right? Gates weren't open for photos to be taken in the stadium at 7 a.m. Who knew we took photos at 7 a.m.? But for one of our teams. We get calls at night. He fields calls for broken down buses or injuries from an athlete that happens, that sort of thing. I wanted to put in perspective a little bit about the amount of time. There was a little bit of a question about could we shift the workday. So if you think in terms of what has to happen in his job, eligibility has to have access to counselors, right? Part of the things that he relies on, like transportation, scheduling things like transportation and referees and different things like that, happen during the day. So if we push his hours, we're limiting the amount of time that he has access to that. But also I wanted to kind of put in perspective the amount of time that they spend at the school for the amount of money that they're making. And not that coaches are not appreciative. I don't want that to be the message. But I had Rick do a little bit of research today because I was just interested. So I asked him to go back and find out how many not total events, how many home events or dates, excuse me, not events, dates, did we have last year, okay? It blew my mind. There was 106 days throughout the school year where we had home events at our school, where he was there working at some point. And the same thing goes for Coach Hartsoe and JB at Nation Ford. So those hours, if we just look and put into perspective the number of hours that they're putting in, an average day, start setting up at 4 on the early times, maybe 9:30ish, finishing up, making sure everything is turned off and closed up, 5.5 hours. Multiply that times 106 days. And it kind of puts in perspective that $8,000 that we're talking about paying them. I did a little bit of research on the athletic directors around the area. Clover is about $2,000 more than us on the stipend end and about 10 days more on the actual number of days being paid. So they're a 240 contract. York is about $1,000 above us, and the same thing, they're a 240. So we're a little bit behind in those areas. The point that I'm making is, again, I want them to be compensated. I can speak from this. I coached for a long time. The stipends are, like I said, are not something that I want to play down, but I want everyone to have an understanding. I coached all the way up to 2006, and I'll put this in perspective for you. In 2006, when I coached my last game as a head baseball coach, my stipend was $2,000. Almost 20 years later, the stipend for a head baseball coach at the 3 high schools is $500 more than that. So that's kind of what we're pushing at. Again, the standard of excellence, my goal as the principal, I want that to be across the board. So if we're shooting for that standard of excellence, I'm just hoping that it will be everything that we touch in the Fort Mill School District. Okay.
I just want to kind of add on to piggyback off what Darren was saying, and just go from a personal experience for me. So I've been in this for 33 years, and we talked about that when we did the presentation. In 2019, I was retiring from North Carolina, from Myers Park High, and really wasn't looking to do this anymore. And I retired in December of 2018, so 2019's rolling in, and this job at Catawba Ridge opened up. And just like anybody that's looking for a job, which we're talking about these coaches, and when we get into this, I researched Fort Mill. And the thing that jumped out at me immediately was #1 school district in the state of South Carolina. And it talked about academics and the band and all that stuff, but really not a whole lot about athletics. And my thought with that, and I've said it as we've met to talk about these stipends, everything about that's true. I've gotten down here, man, I've loved it. I'm rejuvenated. CMS beat me down. I mean, it was a tough spot, and this job is a tough job. We deal with upset parents. We deal with some happy parents. We have to deal with playing time, and coaches trying to defend that. And every meeting that we have with parents is that's not about playing time, and it always ends up about playing time. All those things. I mean, we're always putting out fires. But we've all coached. I was a 20-year veteran as a head basketball coach. Dwayne's still coaching it. JB was a golf coach. And so we've been in those spots. But where I'm going with this is I got down here, and everything that they said and that I researched about this district is exactly what it is. It is a phenomenal district. You guys are great leadership. Darren's a great principal. Dee, when he hired me, great principal. But the thing that I noticed and that really stuck out to me was that first, when we opened in 19, and we walked in, and those kids were out there, and we were giving out T-shirts for the different years that they were going to graduate, and there were smiles on their face. Didn't see that in CMS. I mean, they're just beat down. There's no, it's just tough, right? Here, you see teachers with smiles on their face. You see coaches with smiles on their face. You see kids, you see parents that are happy. So Fort Mill's like in a little bubble, right? And so we want to be the best. We want to be great. And, we're doing it in band. We're doing it in academics. We're trying to do it in athletics. But I know when I started, I coached because it was just the passion of wanting to coach. I'd have done it for free. Those times have changed. I mean, you see it across all of business now. It's happening here. And with us trying to hire, different positions. Our dance teacher, I think I talked about this the last time we were in here, she stepped away from doing dance this year because she couldn't afford to do it. It was costing her money because of childcare to come over and do that position. So when she resigned, I thought, man, I don't know how I'm going to fill that position because it's a $1,500 position. And in today's world, people are just going to laugh at you at that unless you can find a teacher that's in your school that can do it. And we got lucky. We had somebody that came over from Charlotte Christian, and Olivia's doing a great job of that. But I just got lucky. Good Lord was looking out for us, and thank goodness. But if we want to be the #1 school district in academics and with band and fine arts, part of that needs to be athletics. And your #1 dropout prevention is your athletics, is your band, is your extracurricular, because they're not getting in trouble. We keep them busy. And like Darren said, we're teaching them life. You may not be a starter, but you do have a role on that team, whatever that might be. And that's what those coaches are teaching them. There's competition. You're going to fail. You got to pick yourself back up, and then you succeed the next time. That doesn't necessarily happen in math class. It doesn't necessarily happen in English. Those are all very important. We've got to have those skills. But we also need to know how to compete, how to interact socially, how to get up and do this in front of people. This is not a comfortable thing, right? And we're talking about not only us getting raises, but our coaches. That's not a comfortable thing to talk about. But this is again, from a guy coming from the outside. So many of y'all went to school here and know each other, and we were talking just a few minutes ago before it started, and Leanne was talking about Darren and her brother going to school together. And I'm like, of course you are. I mean, gee whiz, everybody's related here. But seriously, from the outside coming in, I have thoroughly enjoyed, starting my 4th year here. And if we want to get quality coaches, we can't pay a baseball coach $2,500 when Horry County is giving them $6,000. We can't compete with getting athletic directors to come in here, I'm on the tail end. There'll be somebody that'll come in this position. If we're hiring at 8, but our competitor over here in Horry County or wherever is given 16, where are they going to go, right? So if we want to be the best, then as we fill the potholes and get this thing started, the end game down the road, it's not going to be this year or next year. It's going to take a while to fund this. I get that. But if we want to be at the top, we've got to be at the top of that pay scale to attract them, because we're already doing all these other things right, correct? We got the academics rolling, we've got the leadership, we've got all these things, but this has been neglected for years. If Darren was making $2,000 in 2006 and it's only $500 more, it's just been on that back burner, right? So we just need to take a look at that. So I know you guys probably got a gazillion questions that y'all want to ask. I'll be happy to do that. I know Dwayne will help me with that as well. We'll answer duties that we do. If you've got just any questions, we'll knock those out the best we can.
I do. Got a handful. And thank you for what you all do on a daily basis, because I see you all as I attend a lot of sporting events. First question I have for you is, outside the want and need of stipends, are there other pertinent needs for coaches?
I mean, I can talk a little bit to one of the parents that stepped up. I would like for us to really take a deep dive and look into issues with Title IX, whether that may be facilities, and I think we've started some of that. And I'm just speaking from baseball and softball because those have been the most notable lately, right? They have the indoor facilities, and I know both of those are going up, but I would like for us to take a look at, to make sure that both male and female sports are equally funded and taken care of as far as facilities.
Perfect. That was one of my questions. I'm glad you answered that. Next question.
Can I add one more thing while you're
Yep.
formulating your next question?
Yep.
The other thing along with men and women's sports is the schools. And I think there's been a concerted effort, again, takes time, but there's been a concerted effort over the last few years because we have a beautiful new school that has all new equipment because we bought new equipment when you build a new school. And I know that there's been an effort underway that's still ongoing to try and replace some older equipment and get some more, either more or equivalent equipment at some of the schools that are not as new and shiny as some.
Yep. And I would add on to that and say we have a school that's, I'd say it's still fairly new and still very behind on a few different things that I think is very needed regarding Title IX, in my opinion. What's the greater concerns of our athletic programs?
I think I think it varies from school to school. I know at our school, I think it is facilities. Being the oldest school in the district, old things do break down, need a lot of repairs. Seems to be an everyday job to repair something that's broken. And just to add on to that, as they were talking earlier, our athletic programs are not broken. I don't want it to sound like we're coming here because our athletic programs are bad. We have good athletic programs. We have good coaches, but we want them to be funded. We want them to reward. Look at last year. I think Catawba Ridge, we have what we call the Athletic Directors Cup, the Carlisle Cup. I think y'all are 4th in 4A. Fort Mill was 5th in 5A. That's an overall athletic program. So we're doing a lot of things that are right. We just want to now let these coaches be rewarded for the hard work that they do, they deserve, and also to retain them. Well, I have several coaches that are really good coaches. I mean, we got a state national coach of the year in cross country. He could go coach anywhere he wants, but he loves Fort Mill. His ties are here, so he's going to stay here. But we're not going to always keep guys like that. If across the river they start throwing more money at them, it's not that big of a difference to move over there or just to coach there. So I think facility, going back to your first question, I'm sorry, I should have spoke up earlier when they were talking, but facilities for us at Fort Mill High School is a big thing.
Thank you. Next question. How do we actually manage eligibility?
Go ahead, Rick.
Very carefully. We use Planet High School, and that's software that we use, and we use that with PowerSchool, where we're going to check their grades. And so all the paperwork, parents upload all their paperwork into Planet High School, which makes it really nice, puts that on the parents. Then we go through and check, make sure that physicals are current. It's got to be from April 1st of that current year, and last 1 year from then. Have to have their birth certificate uploaded, and then we check their grades, and depending on what grade they're in, there's different criteria that we have to look at to make sure that's done. So I know Dwayne and I do that together. Our athletic secretaries help with that, and then we go to our counselors. If we have homeschoolers, there's different rules that we have to do with that. If they're in charter schools that don't offer those athletics, then they get to come to their homeschool, depending on where they live. So that's another hurdle that we have to look at. So there's a lot there. It takes several days to get that done, and we usually have 3 weeks to get it done. About
Depends on how quick you get your rosters.
Right. So, but Planet High School is the software that we use for that.
And that's every sport.
Every sport.
Every season, so.
Every season.
So that's,
Right. I think.
It's an ongoing process.
Right.
I mean, even today, you're adding kids for fall sports or getting added daily.
Yeah. We added a golfer today, so.
Couple more questions. Next one, how do you value the ownership of your booster clubs?
They're invaluable. I mean, they really are. Anything.
So?
Well, they fund things that we can't, through our budget from ticket sales. For example, since when we opened up Catawba Ridge, one of the things that we didn't have was a covered batting cage. So we've done that. You've seen that 50-50 raffle out there on the Parkway. We've used that money to help get that process started. If they want to do an alternate uniform, I know soccer's, I've done a couple of them, so that money can be used for that. And just anything that we can't do within our regular athletic budget, they will supplement that. One of the things we started this last year at Catawba Ridge, we have a scholarship now through our booster club. And so just to be a booster club member is $40. We use that money and put it in the account, and we use that money to split up to, we want to do multiples of those. I think we did either 2 or 4. Was it 2? It was just 2. Just 2 this first year, and we're hoping to double that or even more, in this next year. So again, that's scholarship money for them to go to college. So, it's multifaceted on what they do. And they run our concessions and help us with those volunteers. When you come to a game on Friday night, it didn't just happen. There's a lot going on. That booster club is behind that an awful lot. So, you want to speak to yours?
And unfortunately, about 10 years ago, because of the way the state was funded, the school board here had to cut funding for our middle school sports. So it was a group of parents and community members. I know that there are a lot of boosters involved. Michelle, Scott, and I were too. We raised over $325,000 just to make sure that middle school program continued to happen until the district was able to reallocate funds to that. So that's just one piece of how the boosters can help just be the lifeblood of athletics for the schools.
You can still have a game with 2 teams and referees, but it's not nearly as pleasant to watch if you don't have the concessions and all the other activities going on,
Smell
right?
that barbecue. Oh,
And the popcorn.
and the
And
funnel
last
cake?
question. Sorry, go ahead.
I was talking about the funnel cakes.
Funnel
Mrs.
cakes,
Brody.
right.
Gotcha.
Sorry.
That got me Friday night.
Okay, gotcha. So I know there may be state mandates, but I'm curious here. So, are there injury prevention protocols we have?
I mean, we have concussion protocol that it all, with all of that, yes, we do have that, but we have a school-based athletic trainer, and then we have Atrium.
Yep.
And so we can basically put that in their hands. They do. Katie running just updated our emergency action plan, where we give out to all of our coaches if something happens. We have different addresses within our campus, so we get all that out to them. So if there's a bad injury, here's what you do: A, B, C, and D. It's there. If there's an injury on the field, that's what Katie and Bree are there for. And they're a whole lot more high qualified than we are, and I mean they usually nail it right on the head. They work with the parents, so I mean it's The way we have it right now is a well-oiled machine.
Well, and
Thank
the high school league governs a lot of that as well, right? There are protocols about heat management and when you can and can't play and lightning and all of those things.
All that's there, so, we have that weather station at all the schools, and so, again, with Katie and Bree, and I tell all of our coaches when we meet, if they say it's too hot, if the wet bulb says it's too hot, you're not practicing, you gotta adjust. If there's lightning within the 10 miles and that thing goes off, until they tell you can go back out there, till Katie says it, then you're not out there. And, it's just non-negotiable, so, they're priceless, so.
Thank you, guys.
But I also think, the strength and conditioning coaches we have and the weightlifting courses that we offer to those athletes also help with the preventative measures too.
Well, and we've talked about, in our situation, because we were new, we were able to hire somebody with a CSCS certification, which in that weight room, that's exactly what you got to have. We all have taken weight training in our lives, but those guys, they actually know how to take, any of us as an individual, and they will create a personal workout routine for them if that's what they need to do. So if we take golf in there, if we take tennis in there, we take cross country, and those are all going to be different ways and different movements that need to be, put into motion. So, that Shane does that. He sets all those things up. In some of our other schools, they're just not there yet. They haven't gotten that person. So, and I don't know what Dwayne's situation is, but you have coaches that are there until if there's nowhere else to hire, then you've got to wait for somebody to leave, and then you can start looking for that. Well, those CSCS certifications are very, very hard to find. So, when you get someone in the door, you want to hang on to those guys. So, you want to add anything to that?
Ms. McCarty, as she was saying, I think weight training is the key to injury prevention. And I think Catawba Ridge does have it going on best right now because they do have the strength and conditioning coach, which helps with that. But at our school, with injury prevention, our trainers are very involved. They work with the coaches on, some different exercises that kids should be doing, especially with like our tennis players, swimmers, different activities they ought to be doing to strengthen certain muscles. And then, right now, our coaches are pretty much doing the weight training at our school.
Other questions?
I understand the proposal that you're bringing tonight doesn't include reorganizing perhaps some of those middle school sports that currently participate at the high schools. I know there's cross-country would be one of those, lacrosse and wrestling.
Swimming.
And swimming?
Swimming.
Swimming.
As far as that being a middle school sport?
Right, yeah. So is there any changes to those programs that is included in this proposal?
Not those, because they're non-contact type sports. So those, if you're an eighth grader, we have an eighth grader, a couple of them in golf, they can compete because it's non-contact. Where we would like to see down the road is we'd like to see middle school wrestling. That's one that we would like to see, to create that soon. But the other ones, like you're saying, cross country, track, golf, tennis, as an eighth grader, they can still compete.
And some of that goes back to the challenge of, like for middle school wrestling is facilities.
Mhm.
You have basketball going on at least four teams of basketball in middle school with one gym. And they're trying to juggle those practices and having somewhere to be. We could probably help supply mats as far as that, but having them a place, we actually discussed it a little bit. Maybe having supporting middle schools combine to try to have a facility that was, if one school had a facility and these two middle schools, funneled into one high school, having those two combined to make one middle school team, if we needed to, just kind of start those things. But part of the challenge, to answer your question, is facilities for some of those sports.
But is that included in this plan?
That's
or-
not in the cards for the current plans.
Not yet.
Down the road.
And again, that's sort of where we're behind, because if you look across the other York County schools, they have middle school wrestling at their middle schools, and we don't.
Thank you.
Other questions?
I was just going to make a comment. For those that know me and know my family, you know how important athletics is. And for us, it's not necessarily about the wins. Even though here in the Fort Mill School District, we have very competitive sports. We've got a softball team at the top of the list here. But it's really about learning those lifelong skills. First of all, making sure that students are accountable and they're using sports as a vehicle for that. But it's the time management and discipline and that family that they're they're a part of now, and sacrifice. And to echo what Mr. Wilson said, coaches are the biggest part of that. And so I think if our mindset here in the Fort Mill School District is we have the best, we're paying the teachers the best in the state, we've got great teams, great facilities, we should be also mirroring that in the way we're paying and compensating our coaches. So I'm 100% in support of this.
All right, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A handful of action items, starting with Ms. Lordo for a year-end transfer.
Good evening. I'm going to make a couple comments to follow up with their presentation, which we certainly appreciate them coming back in person to answer your questions. We had a great follow-up meeting with the high school principals and the athletic directors, and we thought that would be most beneficial for you to hear from them directly. But a couple things that were brought up. I know that Mr. Young is starting to have some discussions with the middle schools about middle school wrestling. The situation is the facilities, but we will be looking at that in detail this year to possibly bring something to you. It would probably be next year for us to actually start that. But we also, as administration, recognize that need. Another one that came to mind that the high school athletic directors mentioned when we met that you'll probably see us bring to you next year would be adding boys volleyball. That is now a high school league sanctioned sport, and many high schools across South Carolina have that. And so that's an additional one that we are discussing to add next year as well.
That's another one that's going to cause facility challenges.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
Yes.
those play a lot of nights.
Takes some
in the same
planning.
gym as girls volleyball during the
Correct, correct. And then just to summarize, I had sent you a memo just to summarize a couple of changes that were made, and after discussing with the high school principals and athletic directors again, the focus on their priority 1 and 2 changes to the current high school supplement list was focused on adding the additional new JV assistant coaches in the sports that we do not currently have a JV assistant coach. We only have a head JV coach, and we feel like that is a safety issue, especially when our teams are traveling away from our home schools. And then the other focus was just comparability. They did a lot of research looking at coaching stipends across the state, specifically surrounding districts where they mentioned we're competing for the same coaches. And so they analyzed the comps, and the adjustments that they are requesting are to fill in some of those gaps. As they mentioned, in certain sports where they felt like we were significantly behind. The sports that would not be adjusted at this time, they feel like are comparable to the surrounding districts or similar sized districts, similar sized high schools in the state. So we met again, we talked about your concerns, and they still felt like that these were the priorities for them, with a couple small adjustments that we summarized for you. So tonight, I'm asking for approval of the additional June 30th transfer. The listing has 5 items for curriculum. As I mentioned at the last meeting, none of these are new, but these are things that were previously paid from state funding that was rolled up this year into the new education funding formula. So we've not identified a recurring funding source for these items. And we would like to fund them out of the year-end transfer for 1 more year with a plan to build them into the recurring curriculum budget for 2023-2024. We also had an additional $750,000 for land acquisition as we are negotiating a specific site at this time. And that would be the last land acquisition site from our 2018 bond referendum. And just with market rates pricing right now. It is going to cost us a little more to acquire the needed acreage for that school site. And then the last two items are related to athletics. $65,000 for district-funded athletic insurance, and which has been requested for several years by the high schools during the budget process, and then an additional $50,000, and this would fund the priority 1 and 2 request from the athletic directors, and it would fund the recommended new coaching supplement schedule that we provided to you. I will share just a couple things with athletics as I've looked at the year-end numbers. We will be bringing you more detail in the budget process next year. We are going to need to fund athletics at a higher amount of the general fund. We have had a tremendous impact from bringing on a high school, and we knew that would happen because we basically took the same number of athletes. At that time, we spread them over 3 high schools instead of 2. We added the full listing of coaches for a new high school. And then we added all of the additional bus transportation for transporting those teams. We have some reserves in our high school athletic fund balance that will cover us for 21-22. But we are going to need to increase our general fund funding for athletics. I'll monitor that as I see what our growth is this year, but we aren't going to be able to catch that up we were somewhat pushed back because of COVID, but now with getting back to normal, we're really seeing the impact of that 3rd high school on athletics, if that makes sense.
Which is
So,
a good impact.
it's a
right?
great
Because we're
impact.
having that many more
It's a
kids have the opportunity.
Correct. Correct. It's a great impact. It's a great impact. But just to give you some idea, just the coaching supplements and the transportation for each high school is averaging about $400,000. So those two things, without getting into uniforms and all that, is $1.2 million to operate just the coaching supplements and the transportation for athletics in our district.
Yeah, that just happens to correlate with 1.2 million shortfall that we got in our funding this year.
How about that?
Isn't that
Yes.
amazing?
It is amazing.
And
It
these
is
first
amazing.
5 items, like I say, basically would have.
Should have been.
That would
Should
be
have been
part of
funded.
that.
Absolutely, absolutely. In reviewing our June 30th numbers, which are pretty much finalized now in this area, I mean, all 3 high schools are operating comparably. The buses, interestingly enough, all 3 had bus costs that averaged about $101,000. They were very, very similar. So there wasn't anything odd about that happened in 21-22. It's just now the cost to operate 3 high school athletic programs at the size that we are.
You can imagine just the cost of gas with a bus going back and forth, taking
Yes.
a JV team and coming back.
Yes, we've really been impacted by the cost of gas, also by the fringe benefit. We're talking about these coaching supplements, and you see the list. But on top of those dollars, we have to pay the fringe benefit cost, which, as you know, that's increased 1% the South Carolina retirement system every year, because that goes into the retirement system. So on top of just the coaching salary numbers, you have to add 32% for the fringe benefits. So that has impacted us as well during this time. So I'm just sharing that as information to make you aware that we are going to need to have more discussion with you about the overall funding for athletics going into next school year.
Refresh my memory, what the first line item, EAB partnership, what is the EAB?
Dr. Wakesmith? please help me on that one, because I told him I might need some help on that one.
Yes, EAB is a service that we use when we want to research a certain topic, like if we're looking at grading policies and what our schools are doing with grading, we could put a request into them and they do research across the country to send us best practices. So almost like a consultancy, they provide best practice, guidance, and specific custom research that we could also request from them. So we use it mostly with strategic planning, and then if a school has a certain topic or a certain strategy that they would like some more information on, we can use them to procure that information.
Thank you.
And that's an annual cost. That's not like we're not limited by how many times we ask them for help. It's not a.
Yeah, so it's an annual fee, and we could access all of their research for free, and we could do as many custom projects as we want, but it's one at a time. Like, you can't send them 25 custom projects, but you can do one at a time. But they're really quick. We've never had a problem with having a backlog of custom requests.
Nice.
Cool, thank you.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the administration for a $1 million end-of-year transfer.
Second.
We have a motion and a second for the $1 million end-of-year transfer to cover the line items on the, as presented. Is there any further discussion?
Yeah, a couple questions. There are 25 bus drivers we don't have 25, and then
25.
how many assistant jobs are open currently? I'm sure that's in HR. Around 20. So is there any conversation, especially this is a year-end transfer, we've got some additional funds above and beyond the budget for last year, about incentivizing to get those positions filled? Because I think at this point, I have a strong safety consideration, especially for those assistants that aren't in the classrooms, because those are some of our most vulnerable populations. And as well as the bus drivers, I don't know how that's impacting operations at this point, but I would imagine fairly significantly. So any additional conversation about funding to make sure that we can fill those positions?
We talk about that almost every day right now. But it is the uncertainty. I mean, here we are in August. We're just starting the new fiscal year. We have had conversations this week about a couple areas that maybe we could do something not related to buses, but even second semester, once we see how tax revenues come in. There's just a lot of uncertainty now that we've locked the budget down. We've started the year. We'll also be continuing to evaluate now that we are just getting all the new hires loaded in the system. We can evaluate where we are with any actual differences between budgeted payroll projection versus actual hires, and we could possibly look at that. So yes, we're having discussions about it. It's just, if you look at doing something across the board, I'll say for bus drivers, it's $500,000 impact on that. So it's just not because we don't feel like it's important, we do, but it's just based on lack of funding identified right now to match that.
No, I appreciate that
Yeah.
answer. It sounds like a high priority.
It's a very high priority. It's a
And
very
so-
high priority.
Is it, in the administration's view, prudent to vote on this spending proposal tonight when we know, well, how would you classify the priorities above the items that are listed for consideration in the current motion? The funding for specifically bus drivers, potentially incentives, and for classroom assistants?
Well, I feel like at this point, the only thing that would bring us enough dollars out of the items on this list would be the land acquisition. As I mentioned, though, we're in negotiation on this last site. And as you know, it is very difficult to find enough acreage in Fort Mill now for a school with what's required. So we feel like it is critical that we are able to move on acquiring this site for the future, because we don't think we would have this opportunity later. And so for that reason, we've prioritized this land acquisition piece in this proposal. But we will continue to keep discussing and looking at any other revenue sources that we may need to come to you and ask you to consider something else.
And to your question, I think obviously it's always about money, because that's what makes, the root of all evil. But you can only hire what is available, and people are not willing. We see this every day. I see this every day with, trying to find a contractor to fix something. You can only hire someone who is willing to accept that job and take that job, whether it's a bus driver, it's an assistant, or whatever the case happens to be. You could throw $100,000 at it. It doesn't mean that they're going to accept or want or take that job. So do we need to throw money at it? Probably. Again, the root of all evil. However, at some point, where's the definition of insanity in there?
And you did add the additional 5 days for the special services assistants. So we do have that out there available as an incentive. They have a longer contract than other assistants.
And if I remember correctly, we pay our bus drivers, is it the top in the county?
Not anymore.
Or
We do not.
We're just under, okay.
We're just under. The
we've given
three
them
of the
raises every
four
last few
districts are very comparable.
Right.
One came out at the last minute a little higher than the rest of us. So we're working through that. Yes.
So I guess I've expressed concern this budget cycle, and this budget cycle seems to have continued abnormally from the other years because of the allocations and the uncertainty surrounding state law. But I still have concerns about how this is unfolding. There's recurring dollars in this one-time money that ultimately concerns me, adding on top of concerns that we have a number of positions that will need to be picked up into the general budget in the next year. So I'm very concerned about that, and more concerned about the recurring dollars, not the necessity and not the need for these monies.
Well, out of the one-time transfer, if we take out the land, the recurring is $250,000. I'm comfortable with that as a percentage of a $192 million budget. I would not be comfortable if I was bringing you several $1 million in this particular year in transfer.
When I'm assuming if hopefully I'm wrong, right? Hopefully everybody up here says, no, boo-boo, Brian, you were wrong, and it goes smoothly. There's no issues in the next budget cycle. But if something happens and we get an allocation that is less than what we anticipated, how would you go about reconciling that, especially within this funding?
I think we would do what we did. I think Ms. McCarter referenced back to 2009-10 when we had a drastic cut in the state funding. We almost went back to the drawing board and we started our budget from scratch, and we reevaluated every program within the district, and we started with only what was required by state law to make sure we could fund that. And then we prioritized anything in addition to what was required by state law. And if worst case scenario happened and we were drastically cut for next year, I would see us going through that same process, quite honestly.
Potentially evaluating the all reoccurring spending in the
Absolutely, yes.
So knowing that and all the priorities of the district, especially in buses and in assistance, this is the administration's recommendation on how to expend these monies.
Yes.
Thank you.
I have a question. It's more of a guidance. Speaking of the $192 million budget,
Yes.
so correct me if I'm wrong, we used a budget of 18,600 and some change students?
Student enrollment projections,
Gotcha, yes.
correct.
So I understand that we're just over 18, the budget's 18.6, you pick up 75 a week or whatever the number is, you may lose some. Can you help me understand, or is there a discomfort? Let's say 6 months from now, that number is 18.3. Is that a big deal? Or can you help us understand?
Sure. Well, as you heard the curriculum group said that we feel very positive about where we are with class sizes. So we based our projected number of new teachers and staffing on the 18,604. We have a little bit of room there if we continue to grow or if we would exceed that number of students. But with the new state funding formula, it's a very different methodology where we used to receive a base student cost per pupil. Now it is a state pot of money and it is divided by our percentage of students to other districts. So we will not see as much fluctuation, I don't think, if we do not meet the 18,604 because it is based on last year's 135-day average daily membership. So we are hopeful as we've continued to grow that we're going to see an adjustment upward in the new funding formula allocation. I don't expect we will see a decrease this year, but truly we have to go through this first year working with the state with this new formula to really understand if we were at 18,300 versus 18,604, what does that really mean in the dollar amount for us? But I do not feel concerned that we will see less because of the allocation that we used in the budget that we proposed to you being based on last year's numbers.
Thank you, Ms. Laura.
If that makes sense. Okay.
And because while, let's pretend we don't grow all the way to that number, it appears we are still growing faster than anybody else in the state, which means our proportionate share should continue to grow as well.
Correct. Correct.
Thank you.
And it's our understanding that they will make the first adjustment at the 45th day, and then they will make their final adjustment at the 135th day.
Thank you.
We'll report and let you know.
Well, and
10-4.
we're still
Yes.
tracking ahead of what that 135th day
Correct.
was last year.
We are.
So we're still ahead.
We should still be ahead. We just hope proportionately. We don't think there's any other districts that are growing.
Certainly not a lot of them.
Right, right, yeah.
One or two.
Good information. Thank you.
Sure.
I'll spin just a little bit because I have the same concerns that you do, Mr. Murphy, about looking at how we're recruiting and the impact that could have. But we sit up here a lot and we talk about recruitment and retention. And when I look at this proposal, taking out the land acquisition, I see a lot of retention efforts here, support things, listening to the athletic presentation about how this is going to be a mechanism that's going to allow us to keep the coaches that we have and kind of keep the athletic programs thriving. So I appreciate the effort to focus on at least the retention piece that we talk so much about.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments?
Oh, I thought Scott was still about to throw something
I
in.
thought he was done.
I'm ready to vote. Let's
All
go.
right.
I call the question. Let's go.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to approve the transfer of $1 million as described in the materials. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. Okay, then we have a second action item from Ms.
Yes.
Bordeaux.
So at the last meeting, we reviewed for you a proposal to amend policies GCC and GCD, which are related to professional and support sick leave and absences. Two changes. The first one was to increase the number of personal leave days allowed from 3 days a fiscal year to 5 days, so that teachers or other staff, this would apply to staff that are not on annual leave, so any contracts that are under 240-day contracts could take 5 days of personal leave. It comes off of their sick leave balance, but it could be for their own personal usage. The second is related to payout of sick leave when we have an employee who has accumulated more than 90 days. 90 days is the maximum amount that can be used toward retirement calculations with the South Carolina retirement system. It's also generally the maximum amount that another district, if we had someone leave to go to another district, that is the maximum amount that they can transfer. So we have let employees accumulate 120, but they do not get any benefit for the overage from 90 to 120. The other 3 York County districts, 2 of them already pay out over 90 and have been doing that. One is considering that, and I think they will also adopt a change in their policy to do that. These days are paid at different rates. It's not at an employee's certified or their standard daily rate of pay. The other 3 districts vary, and I picked a number in the middle that I thought was reasonable for us to fund. So we are proposing that we pay those out at $60 a day. We are also proposing, and I believe that the majority of you like the idea of paying that in the fall as a retention for those employees who return. You ask us to look at additional wording to clarify that in the policy, the new policy. I also discussed that with our legal counsel, and they recommended that we add this sentence, only those employed by the district at the time the payments are made will be eligible to receive this reimbursement.
Great.
And there is a cost.
There is a cost. The initial cost would be probably around $295,000 because we would initially pay everyone to bring them down to 90. Then the annual cost, we estimated just based on someone using half of their sick days, would be about $85,000 a year in annual cost.
And it has no impact on banking with, I'll call it the exchange, it's not really called the exchange. Excuse me, with banking into.
The bank.
Yes.
It does not.
Right.
It does not.
In terms of the retention piece that Dr. Frateroli was talking about, you know, all the teachers joined or converged at Catawba Ridge High School before school opened for an Engage to Learn conference. And Dr. Epps had expressed to the teachers that and the staff that we're considering this. And I can't begin to tell you, what was it, a 7 or a 10-minute standing ovation?
Yeah,
They were thrilled.
Yeah, if it was definitely a very popular communication. So,
But it allows teachers to be able to use these days in a more meaningful way, and in a different way. It lets the teachers know and the staff know that we see what they do. They're professionals, and we're treating them like professionals, and we're trying to show them that we respect their jobs, and we want to give them that same type of courtesy and respect that they have earned.
Yes. And I think as an administration, we would agree we have gotten very positive feedback about this through HR, correct? Yes.
Will it make the hiring process easier? Should we have?
Well, retention anyway.
Absolutely.
Sure. So with that, I'd like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the administration for the amendments or adjustments to policy GCC, which is professional staff leaves and absences. I was going to do them separately.
You're going to do them separate?
Yes.
Okay.
second.
Motion is second for the changes to policy GCC, professional sick leave and absences. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? That motion carries.
And I'd like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the administration for the amendments and enhancements to policy GDC, support staff leaves and absences.
GCD.
Oh, I'm sorry, GDC, yes.
GCD.
It says GDC on my paper. Thank you. So if that's not what it is.
Second.
No, it's not GCD. It's GC, C, and GDC,
DC.
because CC is
Okay.
professional and D goes into support.
All right.
I had GDC.
So to clarify, we have a motion and a second to amend policy GDC,
Correct.
support staff sick leave and absences as presented.
Correct.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you.
And do you have one more? You
I have one more.
Right?
Okay.
I think this one will be relatively simple. The previous bond resolution that you approved for the $6,050,000 bond issue, which is for our annual IPP payment and our equipment acquisition payment, it identified Wells Fargo Bank as the escrow agent. We have now been notified that Wells Fargo completed a sale of a portion of their corporate trust services to ComputerShare, and now ComputerShare Trust is going to handle these transactions. So our bond counsel felt like it was important for you to approve an amendment to the resolution, which clarifies that from a legal standpoint.
Do we have any concerns about the sale to that entity?
No, because a lot of we are still corresponding with the same people.
Okay.
It is just under a different name. So I've already had several communications with them. We're also in this, we added a clause, we are going to set up an escrow account for a few months. Our equipment acquisition payment is due December 1st, and because we are seeing some rise in market interest rates, we're going to set up a separate escrow just so we can specifically identify that to make sure we don't get into any type of arbitrage situation. That's where we can't earn more than we have to pay out in interest. So we are going to go ahead and set up a separate escrow for that portion related to this as well. So this new resolution has amended the language for both of those two things to change.
Do we need someone not choking to do?
I know, right?
Yeah.
Can I make a
Okay.
motion? I'd like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the administration to amend the previous resolution as currently presented.
Second.
Motion and a second to amend the resolution,
Previously approved.
yeah, previously approved,
To,
as presented.
yes.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you.
And I believe we have one additional action item, but it's not Ms. Lordo. So Mr. Young gets to come back up.
Would you like to put your heels on?
Um,
Be in good company.
All right, so this is the approval of board policy, Ms. Branning, EBCB.
That's right.
Safety plans and drills. So just to refresh your memory, this is not a change in the frequency or the type of drills that we're doing. This is really adding the fire and safety inspections. These are separate from inspections by the fire marshal, and they have to be conducted by school personnel, which our principals will ultimately be in charge of those, but they will do them in conjunction with our maintenance department and student services department. We will assist with that, and we will be training them on how to do these types of inspections each month.
And this is precipitated due to change in state law. not
Correct.
Because of anything that we have
Exactly.
identified.
Yep.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept the recommendation of the administration to amend policy EBCB, safety plans and drills, as presented this evening.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve changes to policy EBCB, safety plans and drills, as presented. Any discussion? It's not really pertinent to this particular topic, to this particular policy necessarily, but I think along with the monthly inspections, I think there's also ongoing dialogue with principals, with administration, with our safety and security expert, whose title I never can remember
Yep.
exactly what he's called. That to some of the questions that came up earlier, I do think that there is an ongoing review of protocols and changes in technology, changes in any opportunities to make sure that we do what we can to keep our students safe at school.
Correct. And we are meeting monthly, if not more. We're meeting monthly with principals, but we're meeting monthly as a group. Jocelyn Young, Director of Student Services, along with Rich Todd, Brian Spittle, Brian Zolka with maintenance technology, are constantly meeting, looking at what we're doing and trying to evaluate that to see if we need to do anything in addition to implement safety protocols, and just looking at what we have in place so far. So constantly evaluating that, and we'll continue to do that.
Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries. With that, we are in need of an executive session to receive personnel recommendations, discuss a legal issue, and to discuss contractual issues. I would entertain a motion for executive session.
Motion